Well, good morning, fellow humans. I hope you're having a beautiful morning or evening or whatever your existence has prescribed for you while you may or may not watch this this video. Um, I wanted to kind of acknowledge the fact that the last video that I sent was both very long, but also pretty intense. That was on purpose, but I think all things need balance, and I just wanted to kind of not salve bring counterpoint to some of the intensity that I brought with last video. I want to make sure because I want to make sure that I also am sharing other things other than just topics associated with that. Not, I don't know that I would call it triggering topics, but topics that are of difficulty. Um, I know that the world can be a pretty intense place, and seekers of truth sometimes wind up being overwhelmed, especially especially in right now where we are at a, as we've spoken before, we are at a pivot point in history, and the it's difficult to live through to with a sense of without damaging your spirit. Um, because a lot of these things we talk about are traumatic, one way or the other. It doesn't really matter what your position is, or whether you are, even if you are, even if you are a neo-Confederate. I still. I would like to speak a little bit about hoplology, or human combative behavior, and like how the path to conflict, how the path to my personal philosophy, which is a kind of a um, heavily steeped in the concepts of knighthood and the concepts of chivalric expression and honor. And I want to speak a little bit in a positive or hopeful manner. And it's difficult to do on the battlefield of life. It really is. And especially when we have to do a lot of self-introspection. Um, Conflict is difficult to bear. And I have come to the realization, especially lately, because of my own in my own existence, I'm really challenged by the current state of the world. I have my own proclivities of how I act and how I react to conflict. I tend to charge at it, the things that scare me. That's just kind of bent hairpin that I am, and I've had to deal with that all my life. And I'm a student of martial philosophy and martial practicality. Um, I have a lot to say about, especially martial cultures over the years, over the decades, over the centuries, and how fundamental conflict and the ability to deal with conflict is for the human species. There's no way around dealing with the fact that we as humans can be very violent, very the opposite of peace and love. Um, there's a lot of topics associated with this, but I want to kind of focus a little bit on one thing, like one tool that I have learned to help myself navigate and to mitigate the effects, I guess, of dancing with the devil that is human conflict. Um, And a lot of it has to do with perspective. I am a practitioner, have been a practitioner most of my life of combative sport. I have competed at the highest level in my sport on an international level, and I am not the best. I never have been the best. I don't have innate talent. I have had to work for my prowess, and a very difficult, well, I wouldn't call it difficult, but I mean, it is challenging. And my path has been challenging to the wisdom of the sword. And that may sound a bit corny to you, even that. And you can denigrate. That's okay. People's paths can be different and still have validity. And my path to the chivalric lifestyle is has a lot of. I have a lot to say about that, about the pursuit, about why a broken individual like me needs it to be a functioning member of society. It's not everyone's path. It should never be everyone's path. But there are certain things that can be gleaned that are universal. And I've got a lot of things to say, I guess, about that, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of explore some of those areas as we converse. Because it's really a big part of who I am, and if this attempt is to try to not encapsulate but to expose my viewpoint of the world and kind of message in a bottle the thing, then I can't speak about life without speaking about death and conflict. I just can't. You know, I am an intimate with death, and I have an intimate relationship, and so in order to walk these paths of conflict, and in order to give comfort to the men and the women that express and bear the burden of our martial requirements as a society, and to understand them, it's a unique and difficult path, and the vast majority of people do not understand that conflict, that don't understand that word, and really they don't understand the spectrum of conflict. And a lot of people just think that fear, pain, suffering, all of these things are internal. There's really very little profit in trying to compare each other's pain and to judge according to an external measuring stick. Now, obviously, from a scientific method, from a scientific, we need to measure human physiological. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that one person's existential levels of pain or crisis is another person's Friday afternoon. And it doesn't mean that those things, the conflict and the pain that's going on inside that fellow human is experiencing is any less acute than how, for instance, I would experience that very same stimulus or that very same situation. I've got a lot of phrases and things to kind of exacerbate or to parse out that point, but I just wanted to put that on the table that people's pain, especially in the era that we live in, you don't know people's pain, and you can't know. I mean, we can express, and we should express to each other in a kind and in a loving way. Sometimes it's not kind, but in a loving way, we should share our pain and our struggles. And that may seem completely impossible to do, right? When you've got when you're trying to when you're trying to humanize your enemy, that is a difficult thing to do, but we must, because dehumanizing your enemy is a choice. And on occasion, that dehumanization is the right approach. And I've got a lot of things to say about the hoplological or the philosophical underpinnings of how to train someone to destroy another human. It's not a natural state of being. It's not how we as a species, that's the one side of the spectrum. And those of us who care for the men and women that we as a society have burdened with that task, we need to be a bridge, and we need to hold those people in trust when they are damaged by our society, when they make the ultimate sacrifice, when they fight for us. It's important to not dehumanize those people. Now, if you're a soldier, if you're a professional, if you're an operator, if your profession is war, combative behavior is, of course, just like an office worker would be familiar with PowerPoint or with a spreadsheet. There's a degree and there's a skill of operating in that environment, which requires us to not be human in some ways. Killing each other is not a natural state for the vast majority of us. That is as it should be. But martial culture martial philosophy allows us to kind of try to balance that for and with these people. I have never, and I hope to never, be involved in a conflict that is a state sanctioned, or that I've never been to war. I've never been to real war. And war is an unimaginable state of being. It's you cannot imagine it, and I cannot imagine it, even though I have gone to great lengths as far as I possibly could of experiencing and tasting that martial culture that those individuals that we as a society force our killing on. I have endeavored to experience and to share and to understand those individuals that sacrifice in that way for our species. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's from whatever the motivation is. Human combative behavior is one of those things that is fundamental to our species, to how we view the world. And martial culture is a way for us to try to balance that need, that societal need for. Yeah. Now, we can debate on whether killing a man or a woman is ever a moral act, and that's a deep conversation, and I think we need to have that. I think that we kind of joke, those people think or talk about the warrior poets, but it's the truth, and the need for those types of individuals that can walk through the valley of the shadow of death for us as a society to protect us, and that journey of those individuals and how we pick them and how we have forced people into that path. That's a huge topic. Anyway, there's a lot I think that I would like to say about this, and a lot to share about my journey on kind of exploring that, and the privilege that I have the honor that I have been given in life to interact with real heroes, like real heroes, in every sense of the word, and to be a confidant and to help understand, or at least in some small way, thank them for a sacrifice that I will never, and I hope to never fully understand. Conflict, I like to think of it as, as an analogy. Some of the most profound moments of my life have been in the pursuit of mastery of the sword. And one of those and it's hard for me to even start pontificating about this because it's a state of being that perfect fight, the violence for the sheer fucking joy of it, is not an area that a lot of people have delved into. And a lot of this gets into my philosophy of I am not one to, man, I'm having a struggling time trying to convey what's in my head. I think every one of us has, many of us have heard the kind of analogy that is supposed to be of Native American origin, where you've got a good black dog and a white dog inside you, and you want to feed the white dog and starve the black dog, right? So do a bunch of good stuff and eschew and try to cut out the black dog. Well, I mean, at its surface, it sounds that sounds wise. Focus on the things that are good, so that you starve out the things that are bad in you. But I personally believe that is misguided. I think that all things being equal, I personally like to view things, the human condition, as very kind of Aristotelian, I guess. Pseudo Aristotle, where I like to analogize the human being as having four parts, four elements of the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, and the intellectual. And judgment on what it's good and bad is a fuzzy thing, and that's a big topic. And really, good and bad is relative, and a lot of people don't like to think about that way because it flies in the face of a lot of the things that make people feel safe, and make people want to try. And their definition of what a good person is. That's a deep topic. But some of the most joyful moments of my life have been in conflict, or especially in tournament play, with sword play. It's a sport. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of historical European martial arts sports out in the world, and has been since we had swords. And I've got a lot to say about that topic, but not today. But that kind of, there are a practitioner, a high-level practitioner, winds up with a collection of memories of these kinds of things, in some ways similar, or at least analogous to how people process the horrors of war or conflict, or that they have gone through, the trauma associated with operating in that landscape, and what it does to you, and what it challenges a human with. And for most people, if you say, if you look at your enemy and you salute him and you basically say, I respect you, what's a good analogy? Jeffrey Charney basically wrote, You know, I will strike you down and love you for it. That's a phrase that has a lot of internal meaning to a lot of different people, and it's foreign to a lot of people, and they're especially those of us who have been blessed by being isolated from the true scope and scale of human violence, the capacity for human violence. There's a certain point of in there's a saturation rate where you cannot absorb trauma that fast. You cannot absorb a readjustment of your worldview of what good and bad is, and it's difficult to live with trauma with true violence attached to it, and yeah, we like to LARP violence, and aggrandizing violence is a difficult topic, especially. But I'm floundering a little bit on this. I'm intentionally trying to not kind of plan out these videos because I want them to be real and I want them to be raw. And sometimes I'm gonna stumble on my words, and frankly, I think that as we go on, we will be able to develop a language for some of this. But this is my practice in doing this, and so you're going to see me stumble a lot, and I'm okay with that. And I'm probably also going to say things that I may have to unsay, or whatever. At the end of the day, I'm trying to create a safe space, more or less. I mean, obviously, this is very public, but that's kind of my point, where we, as humans, have to operate in the landscape that we live in, and to deal with a modern life that is far more complicated and far more impactful than our ancestors did. And I think that's kind of what I'm starting to drive at. Is I have recently really started to understand one of my blind spots, which is that I have a great degree of capacity for compartmentalization of trauma, and that is an adaptation associated with combative behavior. That is how one must operate and survive a landscape of violence. And we as a society are at this point are entering into a new world landscape of combative behavior, and many of us are traumatized and our sponge is full. We cannot process anymore. And I think part of the reason why we as American citizens are here is because of that. I like to think of I will continuously reference the Civil War, the pre-Civil War America, because many of the conflicts, I don't know that I wouldn't say, maybe I would say most, but I'd have to think about that. Many of the fundamental conflicts of our society, of our American experience, we are still grappling with the original sins that we have. We're grappling with the evil of industrialized slavery, with the dehumanization, the moral and spiritual dehumanization of our fellow man for fun and profit. We're still dealing with that. And, I've referenced the fact that our fathers' sins are the ones that we're still grappling with. And, we're arguing with about 19th century topics still. And unfortunately, those people, the world is moved on to 21st century conflict and the landscape. And now things have accelerated to the point where the average citizen cannot possibly, in some ways, be expected to ascertain and understand the world that they live in. It's just too big now. It's too big. We as a species have outstripped our wisdom when it comes to our progress, our capacity. I mean, that's a trite phrase we say a lot. Our wisdom has outstripped, our level of wisdom has far outstripped our capacity. To the point where the vast majority of our American citizens would, if you asked them, many of them would claim that their morality comes from their religions, and much of that religion, especially in the American context, comes from the kind of constructed aggregate of American evangelicalism, which I've got a lot to say about, but these are echoes of a Neanderthal, that's the wrong word, echoes of a Bronze Age understanding of human morality. We haven't updated it, really. We keep looking back to that for our answers, and it's just not big enough for the world that we have created. It's not big enough for the challenges of morality and the challenges of our intellect and the challenges of our human spirit that we as a species are now facing. And we need to talk through that. We need to understand that we're evolving, and our wisdom cannot, like humans, the evolutionary process, even social evolution, is too slow to deal with our exponential rate of cultural change. It just is. In the last, the industrial age has just blown the doors off of our species, and the information age it's like going from a pop gun to a hydrogen bomb. So of course we're going to really struggle as individuals and as a society. How do we surf this chaos? How do we find our wisdom? How do we invest in our own wisdom? How do we become wise? Well, not all of wisdom brings joy, as the saying goes. But you cannot, I believe that it's difficult to live without wisdom. And it's difficult to consciously choose our direction without wisdom. Otherwise, you're just a reacting individual, a reacting creature. And, this gets into, well, does free will exist? I mean, this is kind of an onion, right? It just keeps exploding as far as topics are concerned. But I want to leave you with one thought. From my own perspective, from my own experience, there are certain events, there are certain tournaments, there are certain, from my sport, certain matches that are crystallized in my spirit and my time as being the perfect fights, where my opponent is testing me and refining my spirit, refining who I am, and that individual is matching that intensity with me in the construct, in this case of tournament, etc. But we are refining each other with the alchemy of the spirit through this kind of physical analogy of conflict. And the most perfect moments, the moments that I found as being profound, was when that conflict was in harmony. Now, how can conflict be in harmony? Usually when we think of conflict, it's, especially in this kind of in this part of the scale of violence, like I'm going to kill you, and you're trying to kill me, and how can that be? How can we surf that violence? How can we surf that intent of two worldviews, for instance, that are antithetical? Well, that I think is my point. Antithetical, or this kind of clash. Victor Wooten has a great kind of. I mean, he's an amazing musician, but he's really just a human treasure. The way that he thinks through things and about things, and the way that he can express himself in words and in music, in his two languages, words and music. But he talks about the fact using music as an analogy for conflict. I'm co-opting this. You play a piano a C note, and then right next to it you play a C sharp, and that has a jarring conflict. It's clashing, right? It clashes with. It's not generally thought of as a beautiful or pleasant tone. But if you take that C sharp and you move it up or up an octave, it's the same note, but it creates a completely different effect. As applied to conflict, we can be at odds. We can be at odds to the extreme. But if we move our perspectives together, if we understand our enemy more, as you need to do to survive conflict anyway, that's part of surviving combative behavior, is you must know your enemy. If you can change your perspective and see the humanity in that person, you can be as diametrically opposed as you were 2 minutes ago, but you begin to see and you begin to have insight into your fellow human, even if that fellow human is someone you got to put down, even if it's a state-sanctioned killing. I mean, obviously I'm taking this to the extreme, but what I'm trying to say is that this principle scales up and down. It could be that the conflict of the person that keeps stealing your lunch in the office. Yeah, you can still be mad at that. Yeah, that's pretty screwed up, honestly. That's not a thing to do. And you can continue to have anger about it, and you can continue to you got to do what you got to do. But take that anger and change it an octave. Maybe why is that individual in the situation where they're stealing your lunch? Probably a lunch that you would have given them in their time of need, because you're human. Maybe they should have asked, right? But maybe they can't ask. Anyway, point is, perspective and understanding your enemy is the best way to resolve conflict, whether that's your victory or whether that's coming to a reconciliation. You can still be expressive of that violence. You can still do your thing that you have to do. But that changes the tone of the conflict. And that's what happened during the Civil War. That was the process of the 4 years of the practitioners, of the people that lived that horror, human horror. And at the end of it, at Appomattox, when Grant showed clemency, when the Army of the Potomac was victorious over their enemies, they chose clemency for their enemies. And I've said, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe that was a mistake that we're still dealing with. But I can't judge that, because they changed the tone of the conflict And we enjoyed a certain degree of peace because of that. The music's still going on. The conflict is still there. It's just changed an octave. And that's good. And then the civil rights changed the perspective. The civil rights movement changed the perspective. We're in the midst of this. This is, I mean, when people say there's no racism, when people say, oh, well, I don't do this, well, I treat everybody the same, it's just not true. It's just not factual. What it is it a function of the individual not actually understanding the landscape of the battlefield that they're living in, or where the conflict came from, or where the conflict is going. And so they're just belligerent, well, not belligerent, so they're just reactive, right? Well, talk to a veteran, any veteran. Actually, you should talk to veterans, period. Some of the most profound things about humanity can be gleaned from that Vietnam vet. Go buy him a beer. From that Afghanistan vet. Go buy him a beer. From the veterans that just were forced to take over a Latin American country. Go buy that man or woman a beer. That's our fault, right? And they did, they did. Unless it was an illegal order, right? If it was a legal order, we put them there as a society. If it's an illegal order, fine, that's another discussion. The Vietnam era veterans are fascinating people to talk about, to talk to, their experiences. It's the last time that we enacted the draft, which was basically taking the decision point of a man or a woman's future from them and forcing them into this lifestyle, forcing them into the trauma of combat, the trauma of conflict, the trauma of a theater of war. And we have failed them in our promises as a society. You know that. The newer veterans from newer conflicts, the Cold War veterans, the veterans of the Afghanistan conflict, of newer conflicts, these individuals, that was a different whole theater of war, the whole different experience that we put them through. So at least have them the courtesy to sit down and share in their experiences, because that's our job, because we did that to them. And you could argue it's the right thing to do, it was the right thing to do, blah, 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 blah. You could think that, Dick Cheney should have been tried for seditious conspiracy. You could, it doesn't really matter what your opinion is, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The reality is that those are broken men and women that paid the price. And those people, veterans, tend to go through a process of rehumanizing their enemies. We see this a lot. The Civil War. One of the reasons, the culture of veterans after the Civil War was to, come together with encampments and to try to readjust themselves, try to relive. That's why the battlefield of Gettysburg is so important to every American. Every American. I think every American should take pilgrimage to the battlefield of Gettysburg. And I use that word on purpose, because you will never understand what's going on in Minnesota or the White House or South Carolina or Chicago without understanding, or at least having some understanding of the Civil War and how that happened. This is an echo of that cannon fire. Well, that's what we're living in. This is the pattern. This is the octave has changed, but the conflict of those two notes is still there. Now, the nature of those two notes didn't really change. They're still the same notes, but we just changed perspective. We just changed octaves. That's what the Constitution can give us, an ability to not kill each other and to still have conflict, right? And then to make music together in our conflict. That's the Constitution. That's music. That's music of the spirit. And you can believe in your gods, you can believe in your worldview, you can believe in, Zoroastrian, you can believe in whatever you want. I can believe in whatever I want. We can be in conflict, but we can make music together. I believe that. That's not cutting out things. That's not defeating the enemy. That's not banishing the devil, whatever we think that is. That's understanding the music of conflict, the music of life, the music that is our species. You can dance in the conflict. There's a rhythm to it. There's wisdom. There's a key to human understanding in how we humans come into conflict and deal with it. And the Constitution is a function of social evolution, that its promise of a more perfect union, right? Of being able to change octaves, of being able to have conflict, but still make beautiful music together. That's the Constitution. So when you can't cut out the black dog, you're starving the black dog. That just means that half of your soul is starving. It doesn't mean that you're a better person. Find the wisdom to understand those black, dark things inside you, to understand the banal impulses of humanity, to understand the bloodlust, the joy, to stop trying to convince yourself that you're some kind of a saint. That's not balance. That's not enlightenment. Enlightenment is understanding who you are and balancing those things. And the way to balance them is to not reduce. It's never to reduce. It's always to take those four elements of the spirit, of the physical, of the emotional, of the intellectual, and taking those four elements of you as a human and expressing those in as best a way as you possibly can, because they balance each other out. Yeah. Big topic. I guess my point is that if you got the darkness in you, it's okay. It's all right. Now, find a way to feed that in a positive way that is positive for yourself and positive for the community around you. Because the strength of that darkness is required for us as a species to survive. That's how we got here. Yeah, that our ability and capacity for evil is only matched by our ability and capacity for good. So find a way to profit from your proclivities that society would say are negative. Stop trying to mutilate your spirit. Take ownership of it. Search inside yourself. You're human. You're not any different than I am. And in order to gain enlightenment, we must express those four elements of ourselves to the universe. In the universe, we are the universe trying to express itself in this corporeal wave, in the form of who you are. So stop mutilating your music. Just change the octave of the conflict and make music together. That's not hippie bullshit. That's not lay it all on the altar to Jesus and somehow those dark things inside you are just gone because you advocate your responsibility for them. That's not that either. That's being honest with yourself. I have some proclivities that are not good. But I have found a path to walk that turns those proclivities into a positive, and have given me wells of understanding of my fellow humans. And so when those individuals, when you taste the pepper spray, and when you look at your fellow human and you push that nozzle down, whatever you are on the side of this, I'm not denying the conflict. Change it up an octave. Understand that when you take a life, you take a life, and dwell on that. Understand that when you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Understand that when you put yourself in danger, you put yourself in danger. Understanding the landscape of the battlefield is important. We got to do what we got to do, right? No matter what your state in life, you got to do what you got to do. But there's a way through this. Change the octave of the conflict. Look at your fellow human with courtesy. You don't have to be compassionate. That's different. That's farther down the path. You don't have to be considerate. You have to be courteous. That's why diplomacy is diplomacy. That's how combative behavior resolves into music. So that's my message for today. And I don't know how to interpret this other than I'm trying to share hope. Because sometimes, especially when you're not used to operating in a realm of violence, in a realm of conflict, it's a very binary reaction. This is a blind spot for me that I have recently understood with my family, my fellow humans, that conflict, a little bit of a warble in the voice can sometimes be, for some people, can sometimes be as much of an assault as if it were me, if you were coming at me with a knife. It's that reaction. And subjectively, it's the same trauma. Anyway, we'll continue to talk, and I'll continue to get better at trying to express myself in this manner. But like I said, sometimes I'm going to spout off and say some things that maybe in retrospect we may have to revisit. And sometimes this is going to be really disjointed because my purpose is not necessarily for clean presentation. My purpose is to communicate my spirit and communicate myself, and I have to do that extemporaneously. That's just an expression of my combative behavior. Anyway, and my language of love. Those two things are linked. Love and fear. Love and hate. Anyway, change your octave today. I'm going to do that today. I've got some conflict I got to deal with at work, and I'm going to change my octave. And that doesn't mean that I won't be any more or less forceful, or that doesn't mean I won't be any less effective. but the conflict can be change the octave. That's it. I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.